Welcome everybody to the second panel of the day. This is Bamboos 2020, and today we will look at essential services for urban consumers and how do we really make them work for citizens. So today we have a great panel. Let me start with the introductions. I am Meera. I'm the co-founder of Citizen Matters. We serve as a civic knowledge platform across cities, and our job is to enable citizens to become change makers. And today we have Mr. Manivannan, who doesn't really need an introduction, but he's served as, in many positions over the years, right from DC to in Hubli Dharwad to Commissioner of Mysore. He was a ex-MD of BESCOM. He's been in the Labor Department a little while ago, and now I think he's in the Animal Husbandry Department. So welcome, sir. We have Mr. Umesh Mirji, who's the MD of Hopcoms. He was earlier Joint Director of Horticulture, and he's also worked a lot in the rural areas on MNREGA schemes for the Rural and Panchayat Department. Thank you for being here, sir. And we have Satkirti, who's the CTO of Airtel Karnataka. She has done her engineering in BMS College and did her MBA in Manipal. And she's been working for couple of over 2 decades in the telecom industry. Thanks for being here, Satkirti. And of course, last but not the least, we have Sita Shekhar, who is a governance researcher and social accountability tools trainer. She has been the head of the Participatory Governance Research Group at Public Affairs Center, and she was also the executive director of the Public Affairs Foundation later on. So thanks for being here, Sita. So I'm very glad to have the opportunity to moderate this panel. It's a topic that is very, very essential and kind of hits us every day, right? Bangalore now has, now we're talking about 13 million people, and a significant chunk are residents of apartments, right? But whether in apartments or otherwise, we're all consumers of essential and critical public services, right? We're talking about public goods and services like water supply, waste management, power, communication services, transport, but not just these, civic related issues, but also elementary education and public healthcare. These are also public services. So, and during the pandemic, we saw any disruption throws life out of gear. And some of these services are provided by the government, in which case it perhaps becomes a monopoly at times. And some of these services are also open and there is a free market out there. And regardless of this, there is an expectation from citizens, which is in terms of access, availability, the quality and the reliability of the service, as well as responsiveness and transparency. So now as we head into the next decade, the pressure and expectation from citizens will also increase. And how do service utilities and the government also, how do they ramp up to meet these expectations? And where do we stand as a city today? And are we prepared for these expectations in the future? So that's what we will explore today. So I will start asking Manivannan sir, there are 2 things. One is the government has this, it does governance, right? So you have all the law enforcement, you have implementing schemes and all the usual stuff that it does, right? As IAS officers, you're all in charge of that. But also there are all these parastatals and providing, quasi-government bodies, providing goods and services for the public. Do you think there's a different mindset in these 2 roles, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the same set of officials which are, executing both.
Thank you for that question, ma'am. You asked something which is an essay question in the IAS examination, actually. Let me try to be brief. But before that, the disclaimer is that whatever I'm talking now, I do not represent the views of the government. It's purely personal. And currently, I am on a long leave, so I'm not attached to any department. So there's another advantage. So the simple answer to your question is that the development mindset and the regulatory mindset, both are a little different. And we ourselves go through this, the shock when we transit from the first 10 years of being the sub-collector or collector with that, all that, Lal Batti and all the stuff. The second 10 years when we come to Bangalore and we are supposed to head organizations, companies like Bescom, etc., etc. That's quite palpable because we tend to run the company the way we run the district, and we learn a hard way. So answer is both require a different type of mindset. But yes, I mean, a person with some amount of common sense, empathy, and hard work will be able to transit from one to another, actually. Even though, I mean, it takes the learning curve takes some time. And I don't think why the citizens should be put through the learning time of the officers. But yes, currently there's no other alternative. This is the best alternative we have. So there is a gap, but we all keep learning, and we try to do the best possible.
Any examples or anecdotes you want to share to kind of illustrate how there is such a big difference?
See, the first 10 years is that a part of the British vestige where you are actually a sahib, and you can just keep barking around the people and they do the work. And the system is in such a way that, unless you show that you are in, there's no democracy in the district, in the sense in the collector office. So you take decisions and everybody else sort of obeys it. So they don't expect a consultancy process in the deputy commissioner's office. So you are the only decision maker and you're accountable for what you do. So if you call all your staff and tell them, okay, please give your idea, they are actually put to a shock. They don't even know, because in the entire 30 years of life, nobody has asked them saying that, okay, you tell me what is your idea about this. So they are only used to just obeying. This is exactly what is the colonial structure, and it goes that way. I don't think that the British thought that they should ask the natives about the ideas. So it just follows. Though instead of the white sahibs, there are the brown sahibs now. So when we come to Bangalore, like say you take over Bescom or some other company, then you actually follow the process. So your engineers are there, you call them, you just sort of shout at them, tell them, do this A, B to C. So then you really realize that these people are not used to that type of, just doing the work. So they actually think that, okay, I know this, I know the work, I'm working for 20, 30 years, I know better than my MD, but I can't tell him that because he's an IAS officer and appointed by the government. So rather what I'll do is I'll just keep quiet actually and wait for him to find out if there's anything wrong actually, calls me and tells me this to be done this way. If he proves himself, he knows little equal to me, if not better than me, then probably I'll obey actually. So this time I faced the same thing. So it almost took 3-4 months to understand that this is not, Bescom can't be run only with common sense, because you need to understand also some amount of financial issues, technical issues you have to understand. So that the example is that, I learned in a hard way, but because, we have been trained to learn fast, luckily could do it faster actually. Suppose a person takes a longer time, then, what do you call it? The cost is borne by the citizens actually. So at the same time, if somebody asks me, why don't we use these people who are in the department only to be the chief of the department? Quite possible. In fact, the executive director technical will be from the department only. But I always feel that there should be a fresh blood. The CEO of the company should not be doing the routine work. If any company is doing the routine work, means that there's something wrong with the company actually. It applies to all the companies, all the civic bodies. So the person at the top should be actually talking to the customers actually. So if any MD says, I'm too busy to talk to citizens, then he's actually completely is screwing up the entire the organization. No MD should be able to say that I'm too busy for the customers. He is the only person who has to listen to customers so that he get the perspective of his customers actually. So below him, you can have all technical people doing whatever work it is.
Right. Thank you. So one of the interesting things about the government providing public services is there are multiple stakeholders. It's not like as simple as in the case of, let's say, Airtel, right? I'm an Airtel customer and there is the Airtel company and the relationship is between us. But here you have, you have the government, you have this parastatal, and then you have the taxpayers, and then you have the consumers of that service, right? So there are multiple stakeholders. And I think Hopcoms is a good example of that. You're actually started as something to support farmers, and now you also have the consumer facing side. And who are the different stakeholders in these kind of situations, and how do you reconcile their different needs? Who becomes primary and who becomes secondary?
I think this is to Umesh sir actually.
Yeah, this is to Umesh sir, and I think he's on mute, sir.
Our primary customer, our primary people stakeholders are farmers only, who will procure from the farmers. They are our A-class shareholders, and then consumers are there at the last end. In between, we have some C category shareholders, like some mandi owners, and then other suppliers are there. So from those people who will procure the materials and then transfer it to the consumers.
Right. So when you have these multiple stakeholders, what are their different needs, right? So if for example, from a farmer's perspective, they need the best price. But then
Yes.
if you hike up the price there, then here the consumers in Bangalore are going to crib saying, why is Hopcoms charging so much? I can get it cheaper even in my neighborhood supermarket, right? So that there will be a conflict there. And how do you reconcile that?
Actually, this is the daily in the morning from 6 to 7 a.m. We will do this task only. We will compare the rates of other mandis also, and then other markets like more Reliance, then even the roadside vendors, and then we will compare those rates, and then we will fix the rates of the purchasing as well as the selling rates.
Right.
That's a day-to-day task we need to do.
Right. And I think it's probably important for us as residents of the city to understand the issues. I mean, especially the current farmer issues have kind of come, they've been in the news, and it's important for us all to understand where they are coming from, right, before we start gripping and we set our expectation. So I'll come back to that maybe and come to the citizen side of it. But before that, I had one more question on this whole thing of private provisioning of public service, right? There are some services, let's say if you're in a layout, garbage services has to be provided by BBMP. You can't expect a private company to go pick it up, right? Whereas apartments are expected to have their own vendors. Now if you look at telecom, it's like pretty much a free market out there. Whereas in the case of Bescom, it's a monopoly. BMTC is in a way monopoly. So there are these different kind of the way services are provisioned. Which do you think are good from which sectors are fair to privatize, you think? And how does the government, I mean, this is just for understanding, Manivannan sir, and not to, not any a judgment on anything, but what are the different factors that are taken into consideration by the government?
Okay, we'll see in this manner. Any agency and organization which is 100% run by the customers through the fees or charge, I think that should be free from any interference from the other aims and goals of the government. Because if the tax, Bescom hardly gets any taxpayers' money. It is run by the the electricity charge, the tariff you pay. That's used to run the agency. So when we talk about privatization, so you can actually ask why you want to do that. The reason you say that it should be more efficient. I mean, so I would see two different options for this. The first option is to make it more transparent and also to get the best of the brains. For example, the board of the Bescom is filled with only the government officials. So I sort of fail to understand at times. The board of Bescom should be having a mix of the consumer, the citizen, some from finance, some from technical, etc., from the public side itself. Imagine you having, say, some from the best of the IT companies in Bescom, some from the best of the financial companies in Bescom, etc. They will be able to give a lot of input, which currently we are not able to get because we have such people who are not experts in that. So this is the option one, wherein you do not tinker with the financial model of the company, but you are able to get the best of the managerial and technical input in that. It itself will make a perceptible change in the way service is delivered. The second part is the option two is what we call as privatization, where you actually, you get the private investment into that. So what is the need for a private investment when the people are able to pay the tariff. In fact, the domestic consumers cross-subsidize for the farmers when it comes to electricity. And you also have electricity regulator actually. So in those sectors where you have independent regulatory authority, I think there is no need for privatization. But what is required is you have to make them autonomous. The agency should be autonomous. Probably we can have one law, we can have an act which controls the DESCOM, BWSSB separately, and they'll be able to run, they'll be able to do a good job actually. We have found that autonomous bodies even under the government, so if you take National Law School of University, take IITs, take IIMs, so they have a certain amount of autonomy and they're able to deliver actually. So we did not go to the extreme of getting the investment, because investments are available already. So two factors you have to see here. One is the regulator should be really, really independent. So currently we have the regulator being appointed by the government. Actually, it should be appointed by a committee which has a public, which has the court or some judiciary, which has the opposition leader, and which also has somebody from the government. So that it is purely, it's a autonomous body. Also, you have a fixed revenue for that. So if that happens, then these companies can be made autonomous and be able to do the work actually. So I would say that two groups of companies which are run by purely from the people service charges, water supply board, BESCOM, etc., should be able to run with a certain amount of autonomy. And there are second type of agencies which are heavily subsidized by the government actually. So those type of agencies, you have to find out if government doesn't subsidize, who is going to bring the money actually? And is it going to be sustainable? So these are the questions we had asked in the option 2. That's how I would like to see this.
Okay, so let's take the issue of telecom. It was completely, a state monopoly at one point, and now it's a free for all in some sense, right? So I'd like Satyakirti to come in terms of, over the last from the 90s when this entire sector was opened up, telecom has it kind of really helped. It's at least universally accepted that it's helped the consumer to, you have choice, you have better speeds, you have better network, and so on and so forth. And of course you still have something like BSNL to kind of do the last mile connectivity in areas which are dark spots and so on, where it's may not be viable as a business. Now from your perspective, what are your learnings? How do you bring in this commitment to accountability and transparency? You also kind of set up things like open networks. Now, it's not something that a completely a regular private company or a FMCG company may do. In some ways, you're also looking at it because this is a public service, right? So what are your learnings, Satyakirti?
Yeah, so I think, if you've seen the way that the telecom industry has sort of grown, I think it's been one of the fastest growing industries that's happened over the last 20 plus years, from where it started off as, a sort of premium kind of a service, where you used to charge like 32 rupees and 16 rupees to what it is today. And, in India, I think we are the least, GB per the kind of price that we pay for data is the least in the entire world, is how we have actually evolved in being from, a niche service to actually an essential and now a necessity service. And I think in terms of being transparent to the customer, I think, yes, you rightfully said is about open telco is what, at least we at Airtel are, proudly being part of it, is how we are openly telling our customers as to what we're doing and, where we are expanding. And at the same time, you're right, BSNL being the services that we have most of our, crucial and critical services still running on them, including, as recent as, Mr. Manivannan sir also would be aware of the fact that, when we took the entire COVID helpline. So it was so important for all of us to actually have that connect with BSNL, at the same time to provide the, the emergency services plus the contact and help desk information that we have. And going forward, I think, rightfully said is, now I think all of us understand that telecom connectivity, internet is, is the way of life. It's a necessity. It's become so much. If you could just see the curve that happened during the pandemic, from, data being lower part of, internet connectivity, today it became one of the top, curves that was there for a consumer to be part of it, because you're now looking at just not, work from home, you're looking at learn from home, you're also looking at earn from home. So all these three factors is where, we, as an industry are actually going out to the customer and keeping ourselves right in their face in terms of deliveries.
So one of the things, I wanted to also bring up is there are certain areas where, we can say that the state has failed, right? Especially like education and healthcare. At least if you can afford it, you go in for a private school, you go in for private clinic or a hospital. So in a way, we got to a point where private services are aspirational, right? And Sita, if you could come, you live in an apartment also. Let's just take the civic example. Like, you have a lot of it, water and waste and all, using like your own vendors. uh, how does this whole thing work in terms of costing and pricing, right? These are public services, and there are negative externalities of these privatization also. So there are user fees now. Even for garbage, we're talking about user fees to be collected through BESCOM. So what are, again, how do we determine all this? And what, especially the difference between like a individual resident and an apartment dweller, what do we pay for? Do we have the same expectation across, regardless of where you live as a citizen? Don't we have the same rights? You're on mute, Sita.
Sorry about that. So it's a very simple and straight answer. Of course, we do have the right, as a citizen, we are all citizens, whether we live in an apartment or in an independence house. And it's very tough for the agencies as well. It's probably because the major issue that is happening is that the city has grown so much, and the agencies are not fully equipped to be able to deal with the situation of so many households to cater to. They are coming up with ideas of having apartments, dealing with their own waste, dealing with water supply. Most of us do get water supply from this thing, sewage and sewage treatment, which is a major issue for apartments that have been there for a long time, for them to find the space to set up the STP and all of that. So I would say the agency should think about how they can arrive at a balanced approach where, the burden of carrying the city's services does not fall even partly on people who live in apartments. They could partner, they could help, but I don't think they should be doing all their waste management on their own, because ultimately even the waste that is carried from, for example, from apartments is again going to landfills and BBMP designated places. And if there is misuse or corruption there, then there is a problem there as well. So it's just that you're shifting it from one place to another, and it's still happening.
Right, but there is this sort of distancing from governments, public services, right? Especially if you take like things like education and all that. If you're able to afford it, we move away from it. We have our own like private provisioning. Does that reduce the expectation or like reduce the accountability of government services?
I don't know. It's like a chicken and egg situation, whether the lack of accountability led to people going in for private services, or is it that, they have become less accountable because anyway people are going to private services. Why should we bother? And that's something that probably the service providers would be able to answer better. But then this is something that we can track. And if as citizens, as residents of apartments, and as well as, citizens outside of those apartments, if we are vigilant and if we are, aware of all that happens and keep track of everything that's happening, it is possible to make them accountable, whatever be the situation. So that's something that I've believed in and worked on for decades now. And we've worked with, Mr. Manivannan as well on that in different cities.
Right. And who pays for all this? Manivannan, do you want to come in terms of, you had your project on, garbage management. I think you did it, your Harvard break year. What were your learnings from that project? How do you think, how do you design this whole payment and costing of public services, especially when it comes from the government. Anyway, we're all taxpayers. Should we not deserve our garbage to be picked up or get water from the government?
Okay. The actual cost of providing the services has not been calculated and updated on a yearly basis. So if you ask me, the cost you are now paying, either the property tax or the garbage, the waste cess, we don't know whether it's enough. So what we do is the 15 to 20% money spent by the BBMP compared to the other cities in the world is much less for handling the garbage. And it becomes more stark when you understand the type of garbage we produce, the more of mixed and wet garbage compared to the other countries in the world. So we should be spending much more money on garbage disposal than what you're doing now. The problem is that, disposing the garbage doesn't get you votes actually, in the sense, you don't, like a building you put your name there. I am looking for a time in my life to see that a building is built by the government and they have not put the names of the people in that actually. In fact, everybody, you won't believe if you by chance miss a name of the person in that stone, you are actually hauled up on a privilege motion actually, that how did my name did not come in the stone. So why I'm trying to say this is, you can't write the name on the garbage. So it is nobody's baby actually. So unless the people make some issues, it comes in the paper, then they'll think, okay, so it is the way our cultural society is going is that we want there's a lot of ego. We also want to become very important, and we are quite blatant about it. So it's like chalta hai. I have to say this openly that I find the people are dishonest actually. So now dishonest iruvaga, we are also hypocrites actually, because one side we are very comfortable being dishonest, on the other side we expect that things should happen in a proper manner actually. So it doesn't work at all. It's a logjam. It's a logjam. It doesn't work. So where you have to start? The starting should be from transparency. Somebody has to demand. In a democracy, unfortunately, the people have to demand that actually. So if you demand telling that, okay, garbage contractor, what is the payment made? Who gets what is the amount? Can you put it in the website? So for 20 years, 30 years back, you cannot talk like this because there are no mechanisms available. Now, in the panel itself, we are talking about saying that IT is there. I mean, now you can reach out to the entire world at one point of time. Why are they not doing it? I mean, if you ask somebody to say that every rupee paid by the BBMP to somebody else, can it not be put in the website and say that today we have okay. So is it technically possible to just list the number of checks or RTGS that are done every day on that actually? So why it's not been done? Because nobody asked for that actually. And when somebody asks, will be few, one here and there. Chita madam may ask or somebody may ask. There is not sufficient. So the set of people have to ask, this is my money, I pay the property tax, just giving to somebody. Please tell me why, how, and whom it's being paid actually. These are the starting points. The questions are asked, then you will know actually how much bills are pending, why the service is not being done. You'll be surprised to see that the poorer karmikas get very less salary, very less salary actually. Right. So, yeah, transparency keyword.
So that's a good point that you raised. There is also the responsibility that we as citizens have, right? We are not like demanding accountability, right? But when you come to an agency like, let's say, BESCOM or even HOPCOMs, like you kind of think of yourself as a customer rather than a consumer. So Mirchi sir, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this. Like, when you look at consumer as your primary audience and the people who are buying your products or your service, what is, how do you create a demand and how do you differentiate yourself? Because you're also competing with a lot of other, the private companies and so on. if you have that, whatever, as a business, I have this consumer, these are my consumers and these are my suppliers. So how is that mindset created, and how do you differentiate and build like a brand and all that? Because there's also the pressure of being a company, right? You're on mute, sir.
16-17 ಡೇಸ್ ಮಾತ್ರ ಆಗಿದೆ ನಾನು ಹಾಪ್ಕಾಮ್ಸ್ MD ತಗೊಂಡು. ಹಿಂದೆ ಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರಿದ್ರು. ಸೊ ನಮ್ದು ಮೇನ್ ಟಾರ್ಗೆಟ್ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ನಾವೇನ್ ರೈತರಿಂದ ಏನ್ ಪ್ರೊಕ್ಯೂರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಲ್ಲ, ಪ್ರೊಕ್ಯೂರ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ನ ಎಲ್ಲಾನು ನಾವು ಸೇಲ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲೇಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದ್ ದಿವಸ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಸ್ಟಾಕ್ ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಇದಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ನಾವು ನೋಡೋದು ಕನ್ಸ್ಯೂಮರ್ಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಭಾರ ಆಗ್ಬಾರ್ದು, ನಮ್ ರೈತರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಲಾಸ್ ಆಗ್ಬಾರ್ದು, ಆ ರೀತಿ ಮತ್ತೆ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಲಾಭ ಆಗ್ಬೇಕು. ಆ ರೀತಿ ಒಂದು ಬ್ಯಾಲೆನ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು
you're creating this balance. But I also saw, like, I think Hopcom's also trying to improve its website. Some new designs have come. So are you also trying to create more of awareness among consumers and build that brand also?
Right. Online marketing start ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂತ ಇದೀವಿ.
Howda? Okay. That's interesting. So when you have like a state agency which is also trying to target consumers, and because you have a lot of competition, so if not, Hopcoms and it is there, the shops are there in some places, but especially apartments are now, they will just go and go online and order from some big basket or Swiggy or something like that. So you have much more of that pressure on you.
Yes.
So that's, I think, one of the, even this is a level playing field, that those are also, I think, issues. Satkesi, do you want to come in this whole thing of, the role of citizens versus customers, sorry. I mean, customers are very, like, it's very clear. I mean, that relationship is like obvious, but in a way, as citizens also, like, for example, like, somebody may crib, like, Airtel has dug up a street, right? You want the service. At the same time, there's also this expectation that you have to be invisible as a, not cause any inconvenience. So that sort of, that difference in those roles, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so I think very nicely put in, Meera. The fact of the matter is, we are meant to be in every nook and corner of your residence. We are meant to be in every nook and corner of the place. But at the same time, either putting the fiber, there is immense pressure on us not to put it parallelly, either be it underground. I mean, yes, we do have issues around ROW, etc. And, we need to comply by the rules of the land. And then at the same time, putting overhead cables. I mean, I'm personally against it, but at the same time, how do you connect then? Either you have to lay fiber, or you need to put a tower in the, vicinity for you to provide coverage. I mean, there are, I'm also part of an RWA. I know the challenges that come around it. So everybody wants coverage, but at the same time, we do not want you to come within our complex. We want you to be outside. And, at the same time, we will not allow you to come. And at the same, and, you please also ensure that you give us, 100 Mbps speed and, without any fiber. So these are the challenges that we have. And as a citizen, I think, not just being a consumer, it's very important for you to be able to support, the needs and the requirements for us to provide the same. It's as good as us saying that, the roads of Bangalore, with all the potholes, we make so much noise around it. And, we have issues around it. And, all these things. And then we say that once we do it, we don't want any infrastructure company to come and dig it, etc., like that. So I think we're trying to work around, whatever is the, control or mechanism that we have along with the government bodies. But, largely, I think from a consumer and a citizen, it's very important for us to be a lot more supportive to the industries to allow us to do and, get into the requirements and whatever it is there, because there's no way that I can cover from outside or, either telecom service providers or anybody for that matter. You have limitations for us to get right inside. So this is where I think as, the RWAs and apartment owners associations really have to stand up and allow anybody that they wish to, who would want to be as part of the service provider, to allow them inside and be able to provide the same. And I think we can co-work together and make it a better place.
Right. Thank you, Satkirti. I just want to move into talking about this quality and reliability issues, right? When you talk about service, one of the most important things is how dependable is the service. how do you measure that, and how do you ensure that performance improves year after year, right? As a private company, you will have your, Lasat, you may have your own ways of measurement. I mean, you'll in some ways, growth in numbers and number of customers and ARPU, those are all like metrics that you will be looking at. But what about from the government side? Sita, do you want to come in and explain how governments can actually measure, government agencies which are providing public services can measure their performance? Look at, you've worked on report cards for many years. How do they collect feedback and data? How do you bring that commitment to engage and have independent audits? And so how does that whole system work, and where do we as citizens fit in?
So a few years ago, it was more NGOs or citizen groups that were doing the accountability or the questioning of service providers. But gradually, and I do have an example which I guess Mr. Manivan can also share, about how we gradually moved into service providers having requesting for citizen report cards to be done. And citizen report cards, for those of you who don't know about them, are a survey. It's a survey-based methodology where you get feedback from users of public services for which are basically largely monopolies, for which you don't have the option of going to other providers. And these are services that are provided by the government, and you get and they are largely not accountable for a large part, because there's not enough questioning of their activities going on. And the citizen report card looks at demanding accountability, demanding better services. So it has several measures. There are direct measures. For example, for electricity, you can ask if there are power cuts and how long those power cuts last, whether there is voltage stability, and so on. For other services, we have various aspects of the service that we looked at, which you already listed earlier on when you were introducing about access, about accessibility, availability, responsiveness of the providers, on how quickly they resolve problems, how problem resolution is, and also about transparency, and mainly we look at satisfaction of the service users, overall satisfaction with the service itself. And then we create an atmosphere of competition where one service is pitted against the other. If you are doing a Bangalore report card, for example, then we are looking at BWSSP, various services of BBMP, BESCOM, and all other services that are provided, BSNL, telephone services that are provided to the citizen of Bangalore. So this then leads to, and then we have, it's very important to have the service providers participate from the outset, from the beginning, because once you bring them on board and you are collaborating with them on designing the questionnaire, be it, asking the right questions or covering whatever aspects they would want to cover, where they need answers to certain problems. So that is something that really works very well. If you involve them and then you get the responses from the users and share those, findings or reports with the service providers, they are able to respond back and talk about what resolution they can bring to these issues that have been highlighted by the reports. So that's something. There are several examples that I could go into, but I don't want to take up too much time talking about them. But it's worked, and it's worked for several decades now within India, in Bangalore, of course, as well as in other countries as well.
And if you don't have the agency actually reaching out to you and asking for an audit to be done, how can lay citizens actually kind of give that, sort of fill in that gap or feedback? Because you can't just initiate. I mean, as an ordinary person, we can't just go and rate everybody. It's still like there is a methodology and like a formal process. But Are there other ways that as citizens we can come in and kind of give that feedback and even help collect data or something?
You could do that. We have had several individuals also doing, small surveys within their localities and coming up with issues that need addressing. There are also resident welfare groups would be a very good forum where, these issues could be raised, and they could then initiate citizen report cards to come up with to highlight whatever problem. Not only, I mean, the citizen report card doesn't just highlight problems, it also talks about what is being done well. And therefore, it's a good, balanced kind of measure to come up with. And for example, BAF, for example, can come up with a citizen report card on what are the issues that apartment residents or apartment associations are facing from various government agencies. We already talked about some in the beginning, and then those findings could then be, publicized and discussions held on how they could be resolved. So that's something. There are other ways that the agencies and citizens could, provide assistance. And I remember that in Hubli Dharwad, there was a citizen, there were citizen committees that were set up that would work in various localities, and they would come and, share their experiences and inform them. Even BDA had, I remember one of the BDA commissioners used to say that the public who come to meet me between 3 and 5 are my eyes and ears. If that's a kind, if the officials have that kind of attitude, like, of transparency, of wanting to resolve the issues that citizens come up with, then there are various ways in which citizens can, bring to the attention of the media or individually go and raise an issue. There are various ways that are possible to do it.
Right. And based on the multiple report cards that you've done, especially for a specific agency over the years, what do you see is a correlation between the leadership and the performance?
Yeah, there definitely is a positive correlation, and if the leader is good, the agencies definitely do better, and that's something that we have, our data has also shown. So it's not an opinion, it's what data has shown, that if the agency is led by a good leader, then it really performs well over the years. Yes.
Right.
I'm not taking any names. Yes.
So that brings me to Mr. Manivandan. I have this question. So while it's very understandable that good leaders automatically lead to better performance for any agency, but it's still important to make the system people independent, right? You get to a point, you keep fixing it so that you don't, you kind of make yourself redundant, or at least things work automatically without individual intervention. And literally, I mean, I'm sure most government officers are in the firefighting mode pretty much all the time. So how do you get to that point that whether it is, public services or utilities, there's a certain dependability about them? It's not like, oh, this person was heading it that time, it was like, great, it was, our water supply was fantastic, or our, we never had power cuts. This is how it gets into urban lore, right? But really, the system is the issue rather than individuals. We can't keep waiting for heroes to come rescue us, can we?
Okay, let me share what I feel about this. So any agency has its own inertia and own momentum. So I would compare this with sort of riding a cycle. So imagine you ride a cycle. You have problem with the balancing, and the person who takes the decision at the top on whose table the buck stops. So he has to balance it and he starts moving it. So then it gathers some momentum. So after some time, the leader actually is not required because he has put in such a momentum and the balance. The cycle will go on itself. You don't need to pedal or you don't do anything actually. It just goes normally. But it doesn't continue forever. So in any organization, it's a living entity. There'll be a lot of changes. So even if you bring God and put him on the chair and ask him to put systems in place, After some time, the cycle is bound to fall down if you don't give the momentum at some time. So the leader is required. Only thing is, a good leader will ensure that he will sort of ensure next 5 to 10 years. So better the leader, the insurance is longer actually, and it varies. And it not only varies on that, it also varies on what is the path ahead. So you have a cycle where you are balanced very well, and suddenly the slope goes up. Then again, you have to pedal hard actually. So like COVID times, they are like, uphill actually. So you need to have leaders to push it and balance it. So it's a continuous process. Now, I just wanted to quote what I read from that recent book, the book by Esimoglu and Robinson about the narrow path. He says that he actually talks about the government. He says that the government, if you don't, the citizens don't push back the government, then it becomes a monster, a Leviathan actually. And if the citizens push it more actually, then the government becomes weak and there's an anarchy actually. So it is a dynamic balance. Throughout our life, there's nothing called a permanent equilibrium. It's always a dynamic equilibrium, and the citizens have to keep pedaling actually. You pedal model, then you can't expect the things will happen on its own. So it's going to be a continuous work for you and a continuous work for us actually.
Right. So you mentioned the instance of the COVID, during the lockdown and post that. So let me just get to that topic. Like, what has been the experience, and how did what did it teach you as a service provider, right? Even now, like one of the questions from Mr. Jamir Nadaf, one of the audience, he's talked about like now the vaccine is going to be getting released, and what is it? For example, you worked in Bomanali zone. How would you think that the government should be prepared to deliver these vaccines so that everybody is, let's say, taken care of? So that I think would be a useful thing to learn, saying what has been our learnings in the last 10 months after this whole pandemic started, and how we can use those learnings to kind of improve public services, especially on the health front. Yes.
Okay. Another disclaimer. When it comes to the COVID, the planning is done by the health department. So people like me who are not part of the health department, we are not part of the planning process. We just execute it actually. It's like the army, the command comes and execute it. Yeah. So I will not be able to comment on what we are going to do. I can only say this much, that during any epidemic or something which is overwhelming for the public, there is an advantage in that, because people, when they are overwhelmed, they just look towards a leader actually, and the natural leader is the government. So what normally is difficult for the government to convince the people in such an emergency becomes quite easy actually. The number of people questioning, the number of people not obeying is very, very less. So the learning of the government in handling this becomes a little more easier. Though on the quantum of work infrastructure is too much, the silver lining is that the people are in a receptive mode actually. So then it becomes a little easier actually. So whatever the health department asks us to do, we are able to implement it when we are able to involve the public also. So we involve the public, then there's a trust. So I keep sharing with my colleagues that when you actually ask a private person or a citizen to sit in your office and exchange ideas, you're not only able to get the person to see what you're doing, there's nothing to hide, there's a trust to build, but also the person becomes an ambassador to talk to people. So when I go and tell somebody that, okay, I'm doing this, please trust me, then the amount of trust the person will have on a government servant is actually less than the trust you will have on the fellow citizen actually. So using the fellow citizens and ensuring that they are able to understand what is going through the government process, etc., is extremely important, because those citizens are the actual persons who build a trust. They build a bridge of trust between the government and the citizens who need to be cared for doing such epidemics.
Right. Umesh sir, would you like to comment, because you worked on, this is more on the logistics side and ensuring the supplies were not disrupted and so on. What has been your learnings of working during this pandemic, and in terms of what happened, what could have been done better, what will be your learnings going forward?
I don't have any experience working under COVID, because at that time
I'm saying through the
RDPP. department.
Correct. I'm saying through
Looking
the
after
pandemic.
Manrega.
Hmm.
But one thing we did in Manrega is he created more job opportunities for the unskilled rural people. By that, however, we went up so from Bangalore and then other big cities to the rural areas. There we issued new job cards and then gave them the job. So by that way, we solved the problem of
The labor
joblessness.
set. Yeah.
Laborlessness.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
But
Satkirti, do you want to come in? Sorry. Go ahead, sir.
Upcomes also did some work under COVID. So her might be knowing that in detail. And then he supplied the soap fruits and vegetables to the doorsteps of the apartments.
Correct. BAF had a good experience.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah. Thanks. Right. So, Satkirti, do you want to come in, like, not just about like as a company or as in general, the work that you did, like ensuring there have been no disruptions during an emergency situation, because it's not just this pandemic, there could be other disasters, other emergencies. And how do essential services, how can they sustain and how can they continue in a dependable, reliable way through these challenges? What have been your learnings for the future?
I think one of the key learnings that we had is one, we were not caught a little bit by surprise, because we generally tend to get prepared for certain surges or something like that. But what we were not prepared for was the exodus of movement of people to either the residents or towards rural, because that's largely what happened. So what that led to is you had to literally re-engineer your capacity requirements or the need of consumption to houses and rural. So you have to do it, and you had to do it fast, because obviously one was people were obviously concerned about this. So, and the only way that they would be less concerned is by talking to their families, etc. So connectivity and internet was very, very important for people to be part of it. Though initially there was a lockdown, so people didn't work or whatever it was. At least in terms of the essential telecom services, I know our lights had to be on all the time, because it's important that we did not allow services to get disrupted. So to ensure that one, senior management, etc., all of us were part of we were working from home. We had a controlled atmosphere into controlling our field force and ensuring that we don't sort of, don't compromise on their safety, because, they would be going to the field. But I think the big learnings that's come into us is one, how agile are you as an organization or anybody for that matter to accept this change, and how fast you can move. So I think largely because you're moving more towards digitalization is something that this was possible to do, and it was not that, otherwise we would have taken so much more time to sort of re-engineer how we could route the traffic more towards residences, keep the roads and commercial things off. And even, the entire unlock phase that we went through, because every time there was unlock 1, unlock 2, the entire behavior of consumers changed. So you had to re-cater to all those, without having any kind of, with a seamless way of implementing it, with not having any, compromise situation for the consumer. So I think these are the two big learnings from that, is how fast you move. And, the last thing on your mind should be about growth and KPIs and things like that. It should be more in terms of ensuring that, your business, your services are up and running. And that's what I think most of us, as essential services did. And that's how it was able to cope up with it.
Right. And that brings me to the point that you talked about how digitalization was helping. And so I just like to hear from the panelists in terms of how in your own work or, through the last 10 months, how the role of technology, right? How is it that, whether it is enabling and ensuring services continue, or in that example of the government providing services to workers, or for the health department to reach out to the people with fever and so on. So a lot of technology did come into play because people were sitting at home. There was just no other way to kind of share information, right? So we were not manually tabulating data and writing down in a notebook. So what was the role of technology and how did it help? And again, like, how do we build on these layers to kind of strengthen our, the tech infrastructure for the future. So, Jatgiri, you want to go ahead and then I can move to Manivannan sir and Umesh sir.
No, I think, digitalization and technology is the way forward for anything. I mean, like I mentioned, it is just not work from home. It's about learn from home and earn from home. Even you have like every nook and corner of Bangalore, be it RWS or even normal residences, you have, the lower strata of people. It's so important for them to have a mobile connectivity for the children to learn. And you've seen so many stories and, the help that has gone out to them. And how do you ensure that one, you sort of subsidize at least this kind of connectivity to them, because they're not obviously are not able to come outside. And then second thing is, it's also become a big source of entertainment, in terms of, how you sort of provide this different services on them to keep them. And plus, how you're able to do an online consultation with your doctor, and, how you're able to deliver, all of us know that, the first during the 21 days of lockdown, each one of us had to figure out, how do you stock up your groceries? And, so that's where you saw all your online platforms coming in. And I think most of the, RWAs and apartments, got in together and try to figure out, do we sort of get a DMart and cart and, and just have this kind of services, etc. So all this could only happen because we're digitally connected and you're able to provide the same. So you order before, then you go just pick up your stuff at that particular duration, and then, so you're maintaining distancing and you're also, taking care of these things. And the way forward for any kind of a thing would be on this. And, like I said, I mean, I'm just sorry to be bringing Airtel out here, but then, our work from home products is something that, we thought on our feet and said, how do you sort of get this? Because broadband internet is so much more important. So along with just giving connectivity, you start of giving all other services in terms of, DTH, television, etc. as one Airtel, and, have a consumer just, relate to one product and be able to have all these plethora of services be delivered to him in that one single account. So these are the things that, I think all of us thought through and said, how do we go about it? Even the entire IT industry, though they were not coming to office, how do we, move from ILL or a lease line to give him service connectivity to the house, to their servers, and then run their basic services on this. So these are the things that, were thought at that moment. And then going forward is where we sort of build onto it. And this is the new norm. So I think we need to grow with that.
Right. I just have like one takeoff, and I know we're running out of time, but were you able to provide a differentiated offering? Like you talked about people who can't afford it, for even for, I mean, them, connectivity is important because the children are learning, whichever kind of school they go to. Are you able to provide services in an affordable way to kind of work towards an inclusive goal? Because again, public services, whether you can afford them or not, these are essential services, right? How do we kind of ensure that everybody has access? You may not need access to watch Netflix, but then you will still need access to kind of attend classes. So how do we provide that as a private company? How would you go about it? Because you will still have your pressures of margins and stuff like that, but at some level there's also the social responsibility. So how can you fulfill that?
Yeah, you're right. I think that's one thing that, we sort of looked at is, though we were not able to sort of bring in new towers or something like that. So what we did was, the kind of fiber network that you have, we were able to sort of take that to the next level and sort of started reaching out to them and looked at alternative measures of creating at least zones of, some kind like hotspots. So because where we were good, we were able to deliver that kind of, data capability to the, the lower strata of people, and ensure that the connectivity was up and running all the time. So that was more crucial for us. And then looking at what, the expansion, like I mentioned, though it is not, critical to Bangalore per se, because we're literally there 100% of the areas, but then rural was a big challenge. How do you go about connecting all remote parts of things? So that's when we got into with, tying up with our other service providers, whether we can do the last mile and sort of deliver things like that.
Right. Thank you. Manivannan sir, do you want to come in terms, again, the role of technology in how the government provides services?
I am not, I will not say that technology is going to improve a lot, because we see that a certain section of the population are not comfortable with the technology. For example, PDS card system, or even payment process. A lot of things, we make a lot of assumptions, and those people who are able to create the narrative in the mainstream media. So we are very sort of comfortable with the technology, others are not. So I would say that the government, before converting everything into electronic format, first of all should take some sort of effort to make the people comfortable with the technology. So it cannot be taken so lightly, because we should not lose the concept that everybody has an equal right to get the services from the government. So government should not rush into giving services in the e-mode. It could be an option provided for the people who can use it. But I think the other non-electronic method of communication should also be considered considered in a very important manner. That's one. Second thing is, where the government can go use the electronic thing completely is transparency. I keep on coming to again. This was not possible earlier. We are actually talking on the other side of the history, the river, that we can make everything instantly available to the citizens. That's the information. That way the government is not doing. Instead, they are trying to push the service and other things actually. So even I would request the private sector also, say Airtel or somebody else. So everything becomes electronics, become difficult. You have to also allow people to talk to one-to-one or reach out the places. That makes a lot of difference. People feel involved actually. So I myself, Airtel customer actually, I have no complaints, I must say actually. I also like the way that they put everybody equal. So like a normal consumer, I go to the shop and get things done actually. So this number of manual connections have to continue unless you are able to have more than 90% of the people comfortable with electronic mode. So government, instead of rushing into that, first should use electronic mode to tell the people what they are doing actually. So that will be the right way of communicating. And I'll also want to touch upon this excellent tool for the government departments to know where they stand. The report card, what Sita Shankar Madam touched upon, that was an excellent tool. Somehow the people were not able to force the government to go for the report card. I would say that this should be made into a law that every government, every year, should compulsorily go for a report card actually. That's the only feedback you have. And the other feedback mechanisms are distorted actually. Everybody will have a subjective, when you talk about the elected members from the corporators, MLAs, etc., they definitely they know more about the people than the government bureaucrats. Bureaucrats like us, we are sort of locked up, and we do not have the real picture of what's happening most of the time. The political people, they have a real picture, but they get distorted in their own bias. So report card is a good mechanism to get these advantageous things. There also information electronic can help a lot actually. So getting the report card could be done now both online and offline also. So if we could do it online, it will be immediately within a week we'll be able to reach out to the entire population of Bangalore, which is e-friendly. Then the non-e-friendly we can separately do it. So what I'm trying to say is the electronic format or the e-governance should involve such areas where we will not be able to differentiate in the quality of service.
Right. I think that's a very good point in terms of looking at report cards. I think Umesh sir, MNREGA also had these report cards. I think as an officer, did it help you in terms of improving the department's work itself?
Yes, so we don't have any report card system here.
Okay.
But
maybe it's done by, I think, NGOs in that case.
But in HAPCOMS, we recently started.
Okay.
Our route officers will go to the every stall, and then they will interview two consumers there, and then get their feedback and then pass on to the main office. And then I also do during my visit to stalls, I will invariably ask some of the consumers and then get their feedback.
Okay, thank you. So, but again, that kind of just it reflects on you, rather. So it's all about leadership finally. So thank you all so much for these inputs, and we have a few questions. I'll just take them. Okay, there's one which is I think addressed to Mr. Manivannan. You talked about competency for domains. Like now we see so many appointments where people are appointed to head the government organizations without domain knowledge, or not just about knowledge, but there's also conflict of interest, right? There are people who have, let's say, a real estate background heading like something in the government or some other industry background. So those are and this is of course not specific to Karnataka. This is something we see in India, because we don't have like clear rules about, that prohibit this stuff. And of course, sometimes these appointments are also challenged. So a lot of time and effort go into this, and how do we kind of move to a better and more ethical form of governance?
This question is clearly above my pay band. I don't appoint people. It's like asking a servant that why your Malik is appointing so and so people actually. So I won't be able to answer. But personally speaking, if anything you find wrong being done from the government, please knock the door of the court. So thankfully in our system of democracy, there are checks and balances. So nobody is so powerful that cannot be questioned. So use the method to question them actually.
Right. Then there's one more question, last question. I'll leave it to Sita to respond. How you see this playing out. So there's a lot of citizen pressure now. Now you have BAF and you have a lot of civic organization, and then you also have grievance cell from the government that they're trying, and tribunals, of course. Now, where is the future of services headed? Do you think there's going to be a change in the future compared to the business as usual that happened all these while?
I would say there already is change happening. I wouldn't say things are going just the way they did earlier. It wouldn't be fair to say that. There is change happening, and it's largely also because of pressure from the citizens, demanding and being aware of what they're entitled to and how it is to be done and so on. There is a great deal of responsibility also required from the citizens. So it's not just about demanding what you're entitled to, but also knowing about what your responsibilities are as a citizen. And that's where a lot of us are not, very diligent on being good citizens. A lot of people look at flouting, whether it is garbage, throwing garbage on the roads or anywhere in public places. So many things that many of us still do. And that's something that we need to control. And a lot of, I have seen, I would say that most government officials are willing to listen to citizens if they have something really useful and substantial to say. And there has to be collaborative effort, no doubt. And that's the best way to move forward, to have a collaborative effort between citizens and service providers, so that the service can be provided and improved. And that's something that's worked across the world, and I'm sure.
So speaking of this, in India, I've had a lot of people from other cities come here and say, you guys you people in Bangalore are very lucky. You have a very active citizenry. So I think this equation between the state and the citizen is like, I wouldn't say unique, but definitely much more advanced in Bangalore than any other city. So earlier it used to be this, request for a service, or a, the state acted like this My Baap Sarkar, or a welfare state, saying, okay, I'm doing you a favor by providing you this service. But that has kind of changed in the last decade, a couple of decades, right? So there's a certain expectation saying, hey, I'm a tax-paying citizen, I do expect these, and you are providing these services. It's still not percolated into everything. There's still, like, if you want like a pension card, I think that's going to be as painful as ever. But generally some of these other, especially on the civic side, like power or water, there's definitely a lot more improvement in that equation. And I hope this kind of sort of something that gets built on, and it becomes a much more professional and democratic setup, if I may call it that. And with this, I just invite all the panelists to share like a few last words, and then we can wrap up. Yeah, okay. I will ask Mirji sir, Umesh sir, would you like to say something? Just last words to, to on this whole approach of service delivery in the future. You're mute. Are you able to unmute, sir? Oh, okay, maybe I think he's on a important call then. Okay, over to you, Satkirti.
I think, it's really important for us to have this connect and, the way forward. I mean, citizens do play an important factor. And, I'm really very happy that the way that, BAF is working with most of us. I've been part of BAF last year. And, it's something that, I mean, for somebody who's been born and brought up in Bangalore, I mean, the way that things have turned out in Bangalore, the way we've expanded and things like that, this kind of connect with the government and the way that we're able to influence and, demand or get at least some due attention to a couple of issues that is there on the thing is really commendable, and we should just build on the strength and move forward.
Thank you. Sita?
I will just say that a collaborative approach between the service providers and the service users is the mantra for the future.
Thanks, Sita. Umesh sir, do you want to add anything? Last few words. You're on mute still. It's not working. Sorry. Okay, maybe you can just type on chat, then I can read it out. Thanks. Manivandan sir, you want to, we can just wrap up with your last thoughts.
Yeah, I was just observing you, how you are talking to everybody. So with the common people also, you should drop this sir and just call Mani or maybe Manivandan actually.
Sure.
So this is quite important. I keep telling my office colleagues also, able to address the person by the first name sitting across the table actually puts both of you in the same league, and that makes the person to lose any inhibition or any fear in the mind to put across his viewpoints actually. Very, very important thing actually. So what I am saying is, I want the citizen groups, I have been working with Bikram for a long time now, almost 6 months. I want the citizen groups to engage the government on an equal platform actually. Start with it in the starting, when you initiate it, it will be looking a little odd. Some officers may not like it, some other people may not like it. But if all the citizen groups of the city engage the government on a similar line, then it actually creates a huge amount of change. Because suddenly the officers will realize that, okay, I don't have any special powers, I can't fly actually. I'm as good as a citizen sitting before me. That brings in a change in the mindset. So you guys are doing a wonderful work. Keep engaging with the government on an equal platform.
Thank you. And I hope this will also extend to politicians and other stakeholders in the government. Umesh sir, do you want to add anything? And then we can wrap up.
Okay. I am very eager to give services to all the apartments through HubComs, like what we did in COVID time.
Correct.
We want to serve them.
Great.
That's the thing.
Thank you, Umesh sir. And I think that's a note for Vikram. He'll continue engaging with HubCom so that apartment dwellers have more of a choice. Yes. So thanks all, and it's been a very interesting discussions. And I'm glad we didn't get into the specifics, because if you talk about complaints, and those are never ending, but it really, I think we got a lot of insights and ideas into how to move forward, from technology to collaboration. So thanks all for joining this BAF session, and I, Meera here, and signing off. Thank you all.